You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on the Old Testament historical books. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders. I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner. We're talking about Nehemiah today. Let's get that Hebrew word of the day.
Yeah. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, at the very end of the verse, it says this. So it says, Nehemiah, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hilkiah, now it happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, while I was in Susa, the capital. It's that last word, capital, that I want to see. It's this word here is the word for capital or palace or citadel, tower, fortress. It can even refer to the temple. The word occurs 18 times in the Old Testament, and 12 times it refers to the palace in Susa. So I'm wondering if what's happening is that palace in Susa was more like a tower or a fortress, and it was in that area to kind of protect that or control that area. Because it's really odd that it can be used for so many different things. But if it is more like a tower or something like that, that would maybe explain why.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of colloquially being used, like you would just say, like maybe it literally means the tower in Susa or something like that. But that the meaning of that is more that that's the seat of governmental power or something like that.
Yeah. At least one of them, Susa, or the Persian government had several because it was so large. So,
how do you pronounce that word?
Habira.
Habira.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the article on there, and it's actually feminine, so Habira. Oh, and the word beer actually can mean pit or something like that. So
interesting.
Yeah. Huh. Anyway, so that's our Hebrew word for the day.
Okay, that's great.
All right. Last time we talked about Ezra, and now we're talking about Nehemiah. Mm-hmm. What I wanted to do is show you how they fit together. Because remember, we in the Hebrew Bible, these are pretty much seen as one book.
Yeah, right.
And remember last time we saw how Chronicles ends with some verses, and then Ezra picks them up and says those same verses and then continues on. So we think it's helping you to know where the book fits. If that's true, this Ezra Nehemiah kind of overlaps. It's got you've got kind of like a history at first, and then it's got Ezra's memoirs, then Nehemiah's memoirs. And then it goes back to Ezra's memoirs part 2 and Nehemiah's memoirs part 2. So the books kind of overlap in meaning or in content, and it's kind of neat how they both kind of fit into each other. So I wanted you to see that, and then now we can go to the Nehemiah all by itself. Yeah. Everybody or most people know that Nehemiah is about building the walls, right? I mean, that's kind of like the key thing. And so basically, once Nehemiah gets there, you've got him getting right to where first he goes and looks and sees what the problem is, how bad the walls are and stuff like that. But then almost immediately gets working on them and gets the people building the walls next to them and all that. So that's basically the first actually all the way up to chapter 4, because during the building part, you've got Sanballat and Tobiah trying to discourage them and get them not to build, because it was for them they had free reign on basically taking whatever they wanted out of the temple or out of the Jerusalem. So they basically didn't want Nehemiah to come back, build up the walls and all that. So halfway through the book, he's they're trying to discourage them because it looks like the walls are going to actually be built.
Yeah.
Okay. So then after you've got that, then you've got Nehemiah's reforms. And so it talks about one of the main things is the people in the land or that were in Jerusalem at that point, they were having to pay this tax to the king of Persia, and they had to borrow money to actually pay that, but they were borrowing money from other Jewish people, and the other Jewish people were charging them a usury for that. And Nehemiah gets really upset with that, says, you can't do that. You're having your poor people, your own brothers are being, in so much debt they can't even ever get out. Yeah. So, and Nehemiah was an excellent example of, remember, he had come and he had paid his own way and all that. So Nehemiah could actually use himself as an example of what they should be doing.
Yeah.
So it actually worked pretty well. Then the Nehemiah part, then the Ezra
Mhm.
memoirs come back in, talks about them reading the law and translating it
Right.
so the people would understand it. And then there's a covenant renewal.
Mhm.
Okay. Then Nehemiah's memoirs part 2 come back in, and it's talking about them all. Once they got the walls rebuilt, it said that the city was big, but it was empty. No one lived in there. So what Nehemiah does is he gets 10% of the people to agree that they'll move into the city, and he got it to work, and it worked out well. Then they dedicate the walls, and then remember they had the same problems basically as Nehemiah again. So they
Yeah.
had married foreigners and stuff like that, and they needed to get that taken care of. So it was interesting. Um, these problems that popped up in Ezra's time pop up again in Nehemiah's time. So anyway, that's the big picture. My guess is the whole book is basically about protecting and
Mm.
cleansing the post-exilic community. Because
Yeah.
remember, they get back, they start building the temple, and then they get discouraged and
Right.
quit building. So
Mhm.
Ezra and Nehemiah come in there to try to get them going again.
Right.
And then I can imagine it's pretty encouraging once Nehemiah gets there and he actually gets those walls built. Now the
Mm.
people actually see, oh, it actually is going to happen. And so
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure they're pretty excited then.
Well, it's
So,
such a I'm sure that was such a strong kind of metaphor that things were happening because, the wall I it's an interesting image because we don't really build cities with walls
yeah,
anymore. We don't really think of needing a wall to protect your city anymore. But
yeah,
certainly in times past, that's such a clear indicator, not just to your own people, but to your neighbors, that like
yeah,
you're growing, you're gonna be protecting, what you have.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure that was a absolutely enormous thing to see it finished.
Yeah, it's kind of discouraging to have people in your own country tearing you
Yeah,
apart, trying to
yeah,
get the wall not to be built and stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So, all right, okay. The date is the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, so we
Mhm.
can actually date that pretty close to 445 BC. And the purpose to build up the walls of Jerusalem so that they will not constantly be harassed by their enemies.
Yeah,
And once the walls are rebuilt, Nehemiah then starts working on other issues like
yeah,
lending of money and the intermarrying of even the priest to the
yeah.
people of the land. So,
Mhm,
all right. Okay, so we've got Nehemiah's arrival in chapters 1 and 2. And Nehemiah hears about the plight of the Jews, and he
mhm.
asks the king to let him come. Here's what it says in Nehemiah verses 3 and 4, chapter 1. They say to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are burned with fire. Now, I don't know if that's a new thing or if that's
Mm.
just had been from the Babylonian captivity. They just hadn't been rebuilt before.
Yeah,
Because remember, up to this point, they were trying to work on getting the temple started again, but
right.
they really doesn't say anything about building the walls. So,
Yeah.
so my guess is they probably had been like this all the way back
Wow.
until after Babylon destroyed them.
Yeah.
And okay, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So that's Nehemiah. And nice thing there is you can see his heart. He's over in Persia, and things are going pretty well for him,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But he cares about those people back home, and he's
Yeah.
weeping and fasting and asking God to help him.
Yeah.
So little did he know God's going to use him to do it.
Right. Yeah.
He's answering his prayers. Then Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, it says this. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tomb, lies desolate and its gates have been consumed by fire? And the king said to me, what would you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, then here's what he's going to say. Or he actually asked him then to let him go and rebuild
Yeah.
the walls. And then once Nehemiah gets there, then the rest of chapter 2 talks about him starting to look at the problem and how they're going to solve it. Verses 13 through 15 say this. So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of the dragon's well, and on the refuse gate and onto the refuse gate, inspecting the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were consumed by fire. Then I passed on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass. So I went up at night by the ravine and inspected the wall. Then I returned to the valley gate again, or I'm sorry, entered the valley gate again and returned. So I've got a little map here, and this light arrow here. So he comes out the valley gate, goes down to the dung gate, comes up around to the fountain gate, and then it says at that point he can't get any further. Basically what it is it's basically on a hill. So if those
Yeah.
walls had fallen down, there's just no way to get his mount to go up there. So then he comes back and goes back through the valley gate.
Uh-huh.
So I thought the picture actually really helps me to see how far he got. Now remember, Jerusalem at the time of Nehemiah still is only that little portion there. It's not, I don't think it's this whole, I've got a whole map here, but I think it's only this part here still in Nehemiah's time. So, all right. So then chapter 3, it says remember he's really very brilliant. What he does is he gets the people that live by the wall to build the parts by the wall that are by them. Yeah. So that means that if you're going to make sure that wall next to you is really solid. So it was kind of brilliant in my mind. So here's what Nehemiah 3 says, verses 28 and 29. Above the horse gate, the priests carried out their repairs, each in front of his house. So that was the logic of doing it by the wall by you. After them, the sons of Zadok, the son of Immer, carried out the repairs in front of the house. And after him, Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate, carried out repairs. So basically, you can see the priests are doing it by theirs, and it talks about other people doing it by their house too.
Yeah.
So there's some logic, and it really makes sense.
Yeah.
Chapter 4, the whole chapter is basically about Sanballat and Tobiah trying to discourage them. Now, first of all, they're called the people of the land. Do you remember when the Assyrians, they deported a good share of the northern kingdom?
Yeah.
But they didn't deport everybody. And so what they did, the logic was they sent some of their own people back to intermix with them. Remember, those are the ones that later in Jesus' day are called Samaritans?
Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, they're called the people of the land. And at this point, there must have been enough of them that they could now attack Nehemiah. Right. In fact, at first, when we were in Ezra, it said that they asked, the people if they could help them build because they worship the same God, it says. At that point, they say, no, you can't help us because you're not Jewish. You're not like us. Yeah. And at this point, because of that history, now they're really upset and want to make sure that they don't get it built. Right. So that's what chapter 4 is all about. And 1 through 3 talk about like this. Now it came about when Sanballat heard that we are rebuilding the wall, he became furious and very angry and mocked the Jews. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and the wealthy men of Samaria and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish it in a day? Can they revive the stones of the dusty rubble, even the burned ones? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was near him and said, even what they are building, if a fox would jump on it, it would break down break their stone wall down. So you can see the mocking and trying to get them to stop.
Just want to keep them down.
Yeah, the text is really clear about the mocking that takes place.
Yeah.
All right. Towards the end, Nehemiah finally realizes how dangerous it is because he's several times Sanballat and Tobiah try to get him to come out of the city, and Nehemiah knows it's to kill him. So because if Nehemiah is out of the picture, then the Jews, they're not going to continue to rebuild. That tells you how much Nehemiah was God's man at this time. He's the one that God's going to use. And if you think about it, remember, he's the cupbearer to the king. Right. So he's got a pretty good authority in the king really trusts him, or he wouldn't be the cupbearer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we've got the right man at the right time doing this job for God. And it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
So what he does, verses 13 through 16 explain. It says, and when I stationed men at the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places, and I stationed men in families with their swords and spears and bows, because as the wall was being built, it didn't get all. What they tried to do is get it all to a certain level. So they didn't build it all the way up all at once. They built it like up to about 3 feet.
Layer by layer.
Yeah, about 3 feet. Then they after they got that, then they went further. But it
Yeah.
says that in the low spots, they had people stationed there with their spears and their swords and stuff like that to make sure that they made, that the Tobiah and Sanballat didn't get the people together to fight them down.
Yeah.
Verse 13 says, and when I saw their fear, I arose and spoke to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your houses. When our enemies heard that it was known to us that God had frustrated their plan, all of us returned to the wall, each one of us to his work. From that day on, half of my servants carried on the work, while half of them held spears and shields and bows and the breastplates, and the captains behind the whole house of Judah. See, there's another kind of brilliant move by Nehemiah. He knows how dangerous it is, and he knows that if these guys come and even if they don't totally tear down the wall, all they have to do is harm enough of the Jews to get them discouraged, to get them to quit building again. So here's Nehemiah has half of them fighting and half of them building.
Yeah.
So just think, they got the wall built in 41 days. They could have done it lots faster if they could have just all worked on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, all right. So that it actually says at the end of that chapter that they actually got it built. Then Nehemiah then talks about reforms. In chapter 5, verses 4 through 8, it says, also, there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our field and our vineyards. Now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children like their children. Yet behold, we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. Some of our daughters are forced into bondage already, and we are helpless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Then when I was very angry, I heard their outcry and these words. I consulted with myself and contended with their nobles and the rulers and said to them, you are exacting usury, each from his brother. Therefore I held a great assembly against them. And I said to them, we, according to our ability, have redeemed our Jewish brothers who are sold into the nations. Now you would even sell your brothers so that they would be sold to us? Thus they were silent and could not find a word to say. So Nehemiah really confronts them, and they're dumbfounded. They can't say anything.
Yeah.
So they're doing it. So basically, he's saying, "What good is it? We got them out of Babylon, brought them here, and now they're enslaved again. So you guys are doing it to them."
Yeah.
So he really lets them have it.
Yeah, it's an effective argument.
Yeah. In chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, it says, moreover, from the day I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, and from the 20th year to the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, for 12 years, neither I nor my kinsmen have eaten the governor's food allowance. See, notice it even though it only took 42 or 52 days to make the wall, notice he stayed there and continued to help the people. Yeah. But the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from their bread and wine besides 40 shekels of silver, even their servants domineering the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. So Nehemiah is saying, I'm a good example. I haven't done this, even though all the ones ahead of me had done it. I didn't do this, so you guys better not do it either. Yeah. Okay, then in chapter 6, at verse 2, we've got a plot to kill Nehemiah. It says, then Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me saying, come, let us meet together at Kirphium in the plain of Ono. But they were planning to harm me. Okay, and then in chapter 6:15, it says, so the wall was completed on the 25th of the month of Elul in 52 days. You think, wow, that's actually amazing if you think about it. 52 days is just a little over a month, right? I mean, not quite 2 months. And they built this wall. Now, my guess is it's certainly not like Solomon's wall. Remember Solomon when he built his wall. He had done an amazing job and had these huge stones that were laid
Yeah.
out. So it wasn't anything like that, but was enough to protect the city. And
Yeah.
so it's a kind of amazing in my mind that he could do it so quickly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of now our great example. All right. Um, uh, then after that, remember I told you there was a problem that very few people were living in Jerusalem.
Yeah,
In
right.
chapter 7, verses 2-5, explain that. Then I put Hananiah my brother and Hananiah the commander of the fortress in charge of Jerusalem, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many. I thought that was a kind of an interesting way to say it.
Mm.
Nehemiah probably couldn't find a whole lot of people
Right,
that
yeah.
would actually help him.
Yeah.
Then I said to them, "Do not let the gates of Jerusalem be open until the sun is hot, while they are standing guard. Let them shut and bolt the doors." So I pointed guards from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, each at his post, and each in front of his own house. That's telling me that Nehemiah knows that even though now they got the wall built and the gates are up, these guys are still going to try to get in and defeat him. So he's still worried about people coming in. So they wait until the sun's way high so that they can actually see if there's any enemies around. So it's kind of amazing. You don't realize that Nehemiah is still, even after the walls are up, is still worried about the city being taken, or
Well,
at
and he
least the
posts
enemies.
guards too in front of, each in front of his own house, just like rebuilding the
Yeah,
wall. There's kind of,
yeah,
there's a shrewdness to that, I think,
yeah,
that maybe people are a little bit reluctant to sacrifice themselves for, like, the good of everyone.
yeah,
But you can trust that someone's gonna sacrifice for their own house, their own family, and so
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
little bit of, like, I feel like this is too small of a word of, like, culture building. That's probably how we would talk about it, like, in a business,
yeah,
but, like, you're kind of there's this kind of recovery of, who the people are, and, yeah, we need guards, but maybe we're asking too much
yeah,
to have someone just guard a random spot. They need to guard their own house,
yeah.
because guarding their house is gonna be guarding Jerusalem, and guarding
Right.
Jerusalem is also gonna be, what maybe people don't believe yet is that guarding Jerusalem is also going to be guarding your
Yeah.
house.
Their own house. Yeah. Verse 4 tells us the city was large and spacious, but the people in it were few and the houses were not built. So there, even though we had the wall, it still didn't have much on the other. In chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, it explains what they're going to do. Now, the leaders of the city lived in Jerusalem, but the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 tenths remained in the other cities. And the people blessed all the men who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. So that's another brilliant way to do it. You remember, they still need people filling the land, but they
Yeah,
also need people in Jerusalem. So
yeah,
so I think it was another brilliant move.
mhm,
Okay, now we're back to Ezra's memoirs. Remember, there's part
yeah,
2 of Ezra's.
mhm,
All right, so he's going to read the law, and so he reads it, and the Levites translate it into Aramaic.
hmm,
Remember, the people have been in captivity long enough that now they don't know Hebrew, but they pretty
yeah,
much do know Aramaic because that's the trade language.
yeah,
So here's what it says in chapter 8, verses 5-8. Ezra opened the book in the sight of the people, for he was standing above all the people. And when he opened it, the people stood up. Um, they built this altar or podium basically for him to read from, so that everybody could hear and see him. So that's part of what he was saying there. Then verse 6. Then Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen and Amen. While lifting up their hands, they bowed low and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground. Also, Jeshua, Bani, Sherebiah, Jamin, Akub, Shabbatha, Hodai, Manasseh, or Maaseh, Kelita, Azariah, Jobab, Hanan, and Peliah, the Levites, explained the law to the people while the people remained in their place. They
hmm,
read from the book of the law of God, translating it to give the sense so they understood the meaning. So that's kind of like our first preachers.
Yeah.
So you've got Nehemiah, or I mean, at this point, Ezra reading the law, but it didn't make any sense to the people. So they had then the priest
Right.
translating it into Aramaic, and then explaining it to them. They
Yeah.
say that this is where the first targums came in. Targum means
Oh, yeah.
basically explanation, and
Well, that's interesting.
and yeah, so these were probably. I doubt that they were written down at that point. They're all oral. So my guess is that these are the kind of the rem or the roots of where the
Yeah.
targums came from.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Then, as they were reading the law, the people started crying because they realized they weren't doing what they were
Mm.
supposed to. So, Nehemiah chapter 8, verses 9 and 11 says this: This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep, for all the people were weeping when they heard the words of the law. And he said to them, Go eat of the fat, drink of the sweet, and send portions to him who has nothing prepared. For this day is holy to the Lord. Do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. So the Levites calmed all the people, saying, Be still, for the day is holy. Do not be grieved. So my guess is he's saying, no, we should be celebrating because last year we weren't doing this. We weren't reading the
Right.
law. We weren't doing anything. Now we're actually to a place where we can actually start working for God. And so he's
Yeah.
saying, this is a celebration time. Don't be
Mm.
discouraged.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. All right. Then the rest of chapter 8. It says that, well, let me read verses 14 through 17. They found written in the law how the Lord had commanded through Moses, and the sons of Israel should live in booths during the feast, or the feast of the seventh month. Remember, that's the feast of booths.
Yeah.
So booths is what it is.
Boots.
It
Yeah.
sounds funny. So there's usually the day of Passover, and then this for 7 days this feast of booths. So they proclaimed and circulated the proclamation in all the cities in Jerusalem, saying, Go out to the hills and bring olive branches and wild olive branches, myrtle branches, palm branches, and branches of other leafy trees to make booths, as it is written. So the people went out and brought them and made booths for themselves, each on his roof and on their courts, in the courts of the God's house, or the house of God, and in the square of the water gate, and the square at the gate of Ephraim. I think what it's saying is just about anywhere there was an open space,
Yeah.
they were building these booths.
Yeah.
Um, the entire assembly of those who had returned from captivity made booths to live in them. The sons of Israel had indeed not done so from the days of Joshua, the son of Nun,
Wow.
to this day, and there was great rejoicing. So, do you see what that says? Even the days of Joshua, that
Yeah.
they weren't doing it in the wilderness wanderings,
Right.
right? Because
Right.
there just was no way to do
Yeah.
that. But that means that even during David's time and
Mm.
through the king's time, that they hadn't been doing it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a hint. You never heard that when you're going
Yeah.
through Kings and Chronicles and stuff like that. You just
Mhm.
didn't know that. So
It's
anyway, so
fascinating because you're seeing that the reading of the law and the explaining of the law is kind of there's a lot being recovered, you know?
yeah, yeah, and a lot that they weren't doing. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the part that surprised me because
Yeah.
they actually that even before the exile they weren't doing it.
Yeah.
So that's sad.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Chapter 9 talks about a covenant renewal. Um, in verse 9:1 says, On the 24th day of this month, the sons of Israel assembled with fasting and sackcloth with dirt upon them. The descendants of Israel separated themselves from all the foreigners and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquity of their fathers. And these are the things that they committed to. We will not intermarry with foreigners. We will pay tithe. We will give gifts, and we means gifts to God, and we will live in Jerusalem. So that's what that covenant was basically about. And then verse 38 says, Now because of all this, we're making this agreement in writing, and on the sealed documents, our names are our leaders and our Levites and priests. And then basically you've got them signing their names. So you got a whole list here of people that are signing
Mm.
that they're going to keep that covenant.
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Okay, then in chapter 11, basically 11 through 13 are going to be Nehemiah's memoirs again, it's part
Right.
2. The leaders agree that a tenth of the people will move to Jerusalem, but also the priests and Levites will come there. Chapter 11, 1 through 3 says this. Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, but the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to live in Jerusalem. Sounds like we read this before. The holy city, while 9/10 remained in the other cities. Okay. And the people blessed all the men who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. Now these are the heads of the provinces who lived in Jerusalem. But in the cities of Judah, each lived in his own property in their cities. The Israelites, the priests, the Levites, the temple servants, and the descendants of Solomon's servants. So here's them agreeing to come back and live in the city.
Now, when it says the other cities, would these have been cities like all across Artaxerxes' empire? This is
No,
like
I'm assuming that's the ones in Jerusalem.
okay, so
I'm
this is
sorry,
like
in
near.
Judah. Yeah, these
Yeah,
are
yeah,
in
yeah.
Judah. Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah, the rest of them, I think they're just not even considering those. Those people are still scattered along throughout the
Yeah,
Persian government. But these are
yeah,
the ones that mean in Jerusalem or in Judah.
yeah.
Okay, now they're going to dedicate the wall, and they do it by putting a group of priests and Ezra on one side, and Nehemiah and his group on the other side, and then they go around. Here's what it says in chapter 12, 31 through 38. Then all the leaders of Judah came to the top of the wall and anointed two great choirs. And appointed two great choirs. The first proceeding right on the top of the wall toward the refuse gate. Hoshea and half the leaders of Judah led them, and Ezra the scribe went before them. The second choir proceeded to the left, while following them with half the people on the wall, above the tower of the furnaces to the broad wall. Then the two choirs took their stand in the house of God, so that I and half of the officials with me. So now you've got Ezra on one side, Nehemiah on the other side, walking around this. But that also tells you that those walls were big enough that they could actually walk along the top of them. Yeah. If you go to Israel today, in Jerusalem, those walls, one of the things to do is to walk around the walls of the city. Back at this time, it sounds like you could have done it all the way around. You can't do that today. And remember, they're a lot. The walls today are a lot bigger than they would have been in Ezra and Nehemiah's time. Yeah, so they're not the same walls anyway.
Right.
All right, chapter 13, verses 1 through 3 say, and on the day they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, they were found written in it that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, because they did not meet the sons of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, their God turned the curse into a blessing. Remember, that's the history. Yeah. So they heard the law. They excluded all. So they heard the law and they excluded all foreigners from Israel. Now, one of the things that's kind of funny is that they had Tobiah living right in the temple, and so Nehemiah's going to kick him out and make sure that no Ammonite or Moabite were in there either.
Yeah.
All right. Chapter 13, the rest of it talk about Eliashib getting kicked out. And I came to Jerusalem and learned about the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah by preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. So Eliashib must have been the priest, and he allowed Tobiah, who was one of the people of the land, who initially was one of them that was trying to get him not to build the wall, remember?
Right.
Yeah. So, and he was preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. It was very displeasing to me, so I threw all of Tobiah's household goods out of the room, and I gave order, and they cleansed the rooms, and I returned their utensils of the house of God, the grain offerings, and the frankincense. My guess is kind of what was going on. Remember, here we got this temple, but it's pretty much empty. So Eliashib, okay, he should have never done this, but I think he's thinking, well, might as well have somebody living in there rather than it be empty.
There's nothing happening.
Yeah. So anyway, in verses 10 and 11, Nehemiah now says, okay, it's time to start paying your tithe, and so that they can start filling these rooms with money and stuff for the temple. Verse 11 says, or 10:11. I also discovered that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, so that the Levites and the singers who performed in the service had gone away, each to his own field. So I reprimanded the officials and said, why is the house of God forsaken? when I gathered them together and restored them to their posts. Um, I think we saw this earlier. I don't know if do you
Mm.
remember in the time of the judges, it said that Micah was actually, it says that he's a Levite and he's wandering around to see if he can find a place to live. And
Oh, right, right, right.
yeah, and so what you've got there is obviously the people at that time aren't paying the Levites either.
Yeah,
So what
right.
happens then? They don't. They've got to find some other job. So I
Yeah,
think that was happening here too. So anyway, so Nehemiah says that's not going to work.
that's right.
Chapter 13, 11, 12 through 13 says, And all Judah then brought their tithe of the grain, the wine, the oil into the storehouses. In charge of the storehouses, I appointed Shelaliah the priest, Zedekiah the scribe, and Pedaiah of the Levites. And in addition to them was Hananiah the son of Zakur, the son of Mattaniah. For they were considered reliable, and it was their task to distribute to their kinsmen. So now we've got the temple actually going to be able to be working again. Now that it's going to have sacrifices being
Mhm.
able to be made, and
Yeah,
the lamps to be lit, because it said they brought the oil in. So my
yeah.
guess is finally the temple is now starting to be used. So that means that for all that time that they got it rebuilding in 520, but it seems like even if it started doing it for a little while, here's like not quite 100 years later, and it seems like it's not working anymore. And
Mm.
so Nehemiah is needed to get there to get it going again.
Right, right.
It's amazing. Nehemiah is an amazing man, and because of him being the cupbearer to the king, he's got the authority that he can actually do these things.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so then another thing is they hadn't been keeping Sabbaths, apparently. So
Mm.
verses 15 through 17 says, In those days I saw that Judah, some of them were treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sacks of grain, loading them on donkeys, as well as wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads. And they brought them into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I admonished them on that day they sold food. And also men of Tyre were bringing their imported fish and all kinds of merchandise. Remember, Tyre was like a merchant city.
Yeah, yeah,
They went throughout the Mediterranean Sea collecting things, and now they
yeah.
apparently brought them to Jerusalem. Um, then and sold them to the sons of Judah on the Sabbath, even in Jerusalem. Then I reprimanded the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this evil thing you are doing by profaning the Sabbath day?" And then the last thing is going to be the mixed marriages.
Mhm.
Verses 23 and 20 to 26. In those days I saw that the Jews had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Remember, Ashdod are the Philistines. So
Oh,
these are
right.
from, yeah, Philistines, Ammon, and Moab, the countries around them. As
Yeah.
for their children, half of them spoke the language of Ashdod, and
Wow.
none of them was able to speak the language of Judah, but the language of his own people. So it's saying nobody knew Hebrew, but they knew the
Yeah.
language of these other people. So I contended with them and cursed them and struck some of them and pulled out their hair. Remember, I made fun at Ezra when
Yeah.
he gets all upset, he pulls out his own hair.
Right, yeah.
Nehemiah pulls out their hair and made them swear by God, "You shall not give your daughters or to their sons, or take from their daughters for your sons for yourselves." Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin regarding these things? Yet among the many nations there was no king like him, and he was loved by God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, the foreign women caused him, even him, to sin. So
Mm.
he's Nehemiah knew his history, didn't he? He's
Yeah.
looking back, said, "Look at this is what happened to Solomon.
Yeah.
He's known for his wisdom, and
Right,
yet,
yeah.
and that these foreign women took his heart away from God." So, um, in chapter 13, about three times you see the phrase, "Remember me, oh my God, for good."
Mm.
Because Nehemiah, he's basically living in Persia. He's come back here to try to get the people living the way they're supposed to, and he keeps
Yeah.
praying to God to bless them because he's trying to help his own people do the things they're supposed to be doing. And,
Yeah.
and I think what he's getting at is, man, it I don't even I'm, I'm not even living here. This is not my main. I'm Jewish, but my main uh, place of work and place of living is over in
Yeah.
Persia. But
Yeah.
God, you've seen what I've been doing here, and He wants him to bless him, and
Yeah.
and I think it's great. All
Yeah.
right, here's the conclusions. It was very difficult for the Israelites returning to the land, and they had much opposition. And I think we need to remember that. And so much so that for probably about 100 years, the temple was still lying. The temple was built, but the city
Yeah.
was pretty much lying in ruin.
Yeah.
Nehemiah was an amazing tool for God to get the people moving in the right direction. And I'm kind of amazed at all that God got Nehemiah to do. And I
Yeah.
think it's because of his obedience, but also because of his position that he held in the Persian government.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Even the priests and Levites had married foreign women. This is one of the things that got them sent to the Babylonian exile. And I think that's what made Nehemiah so upset, is that
Yeah.
he knew this is what got you in trouble last time, and now you're back doing it again.
Right.
So, all right, here's some of the questions for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. What was the purpose for Ezra and Nehemiah?
I think it's to reestablish Jerusalem and not just the city, but the people in a post exile world. Like, this
Good.
is the restoration, and we're going
Yeah.
to see how this happens. There's a lot of functional things that need to happen, but there needs to be a rebuilding of the temple and the walls. There's like all these things that need to happen for the city to be rebuilt, but really the people have to kind of complete what the whole point of the exile was, which was to change their behavior.
Yeah. Now, what specifically for Ezra? What was Ezra's basic job?
Well, there was more. Ezra is more temple, more the religious side. It's
Okay.
reestablishing, the reading of the law, all these things.
Okay. And then how about Nehemiah?
Nehemiah is the wall, and I mean that's part of it too. It seems like, for sure, because it appears in there that there's the reading of the law. It's it can't just be like accidental that's happening there, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
seems like there's a lot. There's a lot more happening there in just rebuilding, like how the city is going to work,
Yeah.
who's going to be there, how do you get people back into you know their own cultural heritage in a way that they can kind of embrace who they are and act appropriately.
Okay. And now remember, Ezra is a priest, so that's
Hmm.
his job to
Yeah.
do that. And then Nehemiah is more the political aspect. So
Yeah.
now in Jerusalem and in all of Judah, they're so intertwined that
Mm.
both of them are going to work
Sure.
together to do it. And
Yeah.
yet
Yeah.
both of them seem to have their own specialties that are actually going to make it possible that this gets done.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. How does God use Nehemiah to accomplish his plan for Israel?
Hmm. Certainly the building of the wall, I think, was a big confidence boost. And probably,
Okay.
like, I mean, just like you mentioned a few times that his position as cupbearer, brought some level of authority, but I would think the successes that
Yeah.
he proved in Jerusalem are they reinforce that authority in a big way, that he's trustworthy, and
Good.
not only just his successes, but also that he actually was like a man of God. He was
Yeah.
interested in trying to do things God's way.
Good. I was just going to ask you. So, what characteristics in Nehemiah, can you see throughout the book? And I think you've highlighted the one. He's
Yeah,
a godly man.
yeah,
He didn't have to do this, but his heart was broken for
yeah,
the Jewish people and his
yeah.
own people. But
It's fascinating because he almost fulfills like a prophet type role.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
not a prophet. He doesn't like have a
yeah,
prophecy, but he does kind of have that.
yeah,
In a way, he's functioning like that because he's kind of setting the line.
yeah.
He's
That's good.
saying this is how God has instructed us to act and to be,
Yeah.
and we're not doing that.
Good, good. Um, and then his example as not taking the money from the people, I
Yeah,
thought that was brilliant. And then his
yeah,
plan on making sure the wall gets built by having some people be using their swords and spears
Yeah.
while the others are working, and vice versa. So I mean,
Yeah.
he's a brilliant person, and even parts of his character are now being used. And because he was so wise, he knew that Tobiah Tobiah and Sanballat were trying to harm him,
Yeah.
and he didn't want to get this
Sure.
done.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't even mess with them. He just says, "I have a
Yeah.
job to do. I'm going to get it done," and he
That's
did.
right.
Why does Nehemiah being the cupbearer of the king, help him accomplish his purpose? I think you just talked about that, but
Yeah.
go ahead
Yeah.
and say
There's
it
an
again.
authority thing there too. I would kind of wonder too if it isn't just positional authority, but just proximity.
Okay.
Like there's probably something being, his proximity to Artaxerxes. Like it's not just like a title or something, but there was some kind of closeness that they had. I mean, you
Yeah.
see that there was because
Yeah.
Artaxerxes let Nehemiah leave,
Yeah.
and go do this thing. So I would think probably both those things are related, and kind of
Okay.
working forward. And maybe that helped prepare him too. I mean, he does seem to show a lot of wisdom, just like you just mentioned that
Yeah.
he was able to kind of suss out situations that were going to be dangerous. So maybe there is some kind of political awareness or kind of,
Yeah.
you know, shrewdness or something that he's developed over time, being in the court that helped him navigate these situations.
Yeah. Good. Good. All right. What places in the book demonstrates Nehemiah's wisdom?
My favorite spots I think are those little spots where he has people working on the wall near their house and then
Uh,
acting as, they're posting as guards near their house.
yeah.
That is um I mean, that's shows an awareness of just human behavior,
Yeah.
and how to incentivize people to work hard and to do well. But
Yeah.
but it also it I my sense would just be like you've by losing the city, you've kind of lost your identity,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this is a way to rebuild a little bit this kind of idea of I have neighbors, these are people that I need to care for, and we all have to work together to
Yeah.
accomplish these big things.
Great. Well, that's the end. That's the book of Nehemiah, and
It's a great
it's
one.
it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic book, and it's really good to put it in its context. This is one that you do hear preached, at least like the beginning of Nehemiah. This one does come up. I,
Yeah.
I think probably the average church goer is fairly aware of Nehemiah and kind of the narrative around it. But I think it's really great to put it in this
Yeah.
context, that's historical context, and kind of understand this is post exile and what the exile is, and why this is an important thing.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's true that you can pull leadership principles. That's kind of where you
Yeah.
normally see is people kind of talk about leadership, through
Right.
Nehemiah, and there's definitely good examples of leadership in Nehemiah, but it's very good to get the richness of this,
Yeah.
context to help us understand everything else that's happening in this book.
Yeah. I was going to say that the idea of building the wall is kind of a small portion of this, isn't it? When you
Yeah,
see
right.
what else he did, it's just kind
Yeah,
of amazing, and
yeah,
his wisdom just shines through in the whole book. So,
yeah, absolutely.
uh, well, that's it for Nehemiah.
That's it. Okay. Well, what do we got next?
We've got Esther, which is equally as good.
Yeah, really good.
All right. See you soon.
All right. Talk to you later.